Is Miss Roll with your next notes video. In this video, we're going to be talking about Bohr models, and this is a model for the atom. So make sure you have your notes sheet open. You're ready to fill in some blanks with the notes on these slides. I will tell you the first chunk of this video is the actual notes, and then the second chunk and the last bit of things that you can fill on is practice. If you are feeling confident after just doing the notes and getting through those first few slides, I'll tell you when we're getting into the practice section, and you can feel free to move on, but you can always come back to that practice chunk to help you understand our Bohr model. So, first of all, we need a quick review. As I said, our objective for today is drawing a Bohr model, and our Bohr model involves our P and E, which is protons, neutrons, and electrons. In our last video, if you remember, we mentioned that our protons and our neutrons both live in the nucleus, so that's that center chunk of our Bohr model. So in the GIF there that's moving, it's the blue and red part. And then our electrons live in the electron cloud, and this is the area around the nucleus. And we split this electron cloud into energy levels or energy shells, as you can see in this diagram kind of down in the bottom right. We've got different rings where our electrons will live. One thing to point out about this model, it's called the Bohr model. It's named after the guy that kind of came up with this particular model. And it actually is not the most complete or most accurate model of the atom. It's a bit of an older model, but for where we are in our learning right now, it's actually the best way to start understanding the interaction of protons, neutrons, and electrons. And so that's why we start off by understanding this. If you go on to later chemistry, you will start to get to learn about the other models of the atom, or the more accurate models. And these things are continuing to evolve as we learn more and more about the atom. But just know that it's not actually the most recent one or the most complete model. It's just the best for understanding these things at this level of our learning. So our next bit that we're going to go on to here, if I can get the slide to change, there we go, is talking about how this Bohr diagram works. Sorry that I have to keep moving where my video is. So those protons and neutrons, right, we said are in the center. And basically all you're going to have to do for the protons and neutrons is just write how many there are. So in our last video, when we talked about what these particles are, we talked about how to identify them from the periodic table. So if you go on to any periodic table website, my favorite is linked in your notes, and it's called ptable.com. But you'll be able to pull up your atomic square, where you can figure out the number of protons, neutrons, and electrons. So one example would be lithium, which has an atomic number of 3, which tells us that there are 3 protons, and it has a mass number of 7, which lets us figure out that there are 4 neutrons. And all you need to do with these Bohr models is, and as I'll show you, you're going to write those numbers in the center, in the nucleus. Now the electrons are drawn in these energy levels around our nucleus. Each energy level can only fit a specific number of electrons. If you think about like trying to form a circle around some kind of central person, the further out you get, the bigger that circle can get, right? More people could fit in the circle. Same sort of deal with our electrons. For this point in time, we're only going to be dealing with our first 3 energy levels. And so you just need to remember 2, 8, 8. The first level can only fit 2, and then the second and third level can each fit 8 electrons. And this again is based on that size. The further out, the more electrons you can get. And they do go to levels beyond these, but some other rules start to apply. So for our purposes, we're going to just focus on these first 3 energy levels. Our next slide here, get it to go, there we go. We're going to go through a quick example. So on my screen here, you see kind of what it looks like on your assignment for how you are going to be filling in these Bohr models. So I'm going to go through a few examples with you. So in this case, the first thing you would have to do is to draw our nucleus, that center area where you're labeling protons and neutrons. On the assignments, I give you the nucleus and the ring, so you don't actually have to draw it yourself. But that would be our first step. And then we need to fill in our nucleus with protons and neutrons. So if we remember, our number of protons just comes from this top number here, right? Our atomic number tells us our number of protons. So if I were to be filling this in, I would be putting that we have 9 protons. And then our neutrons, if you remember, is the mass number. So it's this number down here rounded, which just goes to 19 in this case, minus the atomic number. 19 minus 9, and that's going to give us 10 for our number of neutrons. Okay, I'm going to get out of my drawing tool here. And actually going to need to escape to a smaller thing so I can move my dots. But on your assignment, what we're going to be looking for you to do is to type in how many protons, how many neutrons. So like I said, 9 protons and 10 neutrons. And now we need to start filling those energy levels. So if you remember, our number of electrons is the same as our number of protons. Okay, we have a neutral atom, so our positives and negatives have the same amount. They balance out. So we're going to have 9 electrons, just like we have 9 protons. So knowing that, I can start filling my energy shells, energy levels. The first level, if we remember, fits 2 electrons. So I'm going to go over here to my little pile of electrons, and I'm going to move 2 of them. One there, and one there. Okay, so now I've got 2 electrons in my first energy level. Oops, actually that's the nucleus, this first one here. It doesn't really matter, but the first one, the different color, was kind of supposed to be the nucleus. And then I've drawn 2, I've got 9 total. So now I have 7 more electrons left to put in my next ring. And that next ring does fit 8, so I can fit all 7 in this ring. So I'm going to go ahead and start moving those electrons in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and that was how many I was supposed to have, right? So if I count up the electrons that are in there, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 electrons total. That was how many I'm supposed to have in this fluorine atom. And I had 2 in the first ring and 7 in the second, which is within the number that fit. So that is my example for fluorine. So I did that one completely. And that's basically it for making these Bohr models. The reason we have to learn how to make these and do a lot of practice with this is that later down the road, we're going to start talking about how these atoms interact with each other. And how these electrons are laid out is super, super important for that. So if we don't have a good base of understanding of what these atoms look like, we won't be able to talk about how they interact. So that's why we're doing it this way. The other thing, I'm going to go to my last, notes before a couple of examples, is you might have noticed that I added those electrons in kind of a funky way. I started on that second ring by kind of spacing them out almost as if there were 4 sides, and then I started giving them pairs. Again, this will become more important when we get to talking about reactions and bonds between atoms. And so that's kind of the purpose for why. So we're going to start practicing drawing our electrons in that way. So like I showed, each energy level has to be full before you go on to the next one. So that's why I put 2 in that first shell before I went to a further out one. And then second, we want to spread the electrons out first and then make pairs. So one thing we'll talk about is electrons are aiming to have that buddy, that someone to hang out with. And they start off by spreading out, but then they want to have that partner, that pair. So if you kind of look at this diagram that I have on our slide, the first 2 are just in that first shell. And then I start by spreading them out, kind of as if there were 4 sides to our ring or 4 different pairs. and then you keep going around to add the rest of the electrons. Again, we'll get more into that when we start talking about bonds and reactions, but I wanted to give you an explanation for why we draw them in that way. So at this point, if you're feeling confident, you can move on to the practice and try the Bohr model yourself. Otherwise, we're going to go through 3 examples of drawing some more Bohr models that might be helpful when you're doing this assignment. So let me go on to the next slide. So here is our hydrogen atom, which is our very first element. So it's one of our easier ones to draw. And I gave you the periodic table square here. So if we remember, protons is just this atomic number up at the top. So I'm going to start off by labeling that I have 1 proton. And then the atomic number down at the bottom of our square, 1.008. When I round that, I'm going to round it to 1. So 1 minus 1 gives me 0 neutrons. Fun fact, hydrogen is the only element that does not have any neutrons. All right, so now I've got our nucleus figured out, and I get to move on to putting our electrons in our energy shells. Whoops, not what I meant to do. Sorry about that. So now I've got my little pile of electrons, and I'm going to start moving them. We have 1 proton, so we also have 1 electron. And of course, that's going to go in my first energy shell. And there you have it. I've got my Bohr model of hydrogen. Pretty simple. First electron is kind of on that first ring. Doesn't have to be perfect, but just so we know which ring you're drawing those electrons on. Again, once you've practiced identifying the protons, neutrons, and electrons, this should be pretty straightforward. It's just a matter of getting those electrons in the right place. So boron, I'm going to do the same thing. Look at our atomic number is 5. That tells me I have 5 protons. And our mass number down here, or atomic mass of 10.811, tells me I'm going to round it up to 11. Right? 5 and above, give it a shove, round it up. And since there's 8 after our decimal, I'm going to get to 11 for our mass number. And 11 minus 5 is 6 neutrons. And I had 5 protons, so I'm going to draw 5 electrons. I'm going to start off with my 2 that will fit in my first energy shell. 1, 2, and if I'm looking for 5 total, I have 3 electrons left. So I'm going to go 1, 2, and 3. Again, you'll notice that I'm spreading them out because these are the first couple of them, so they're kind of establishing their spot, and then those next electrons would start giving them buddies. But now I can double check. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 electrons and 5 protons, so I am good to go with my Bohr model. Our last example here, one with a few more electrons, is magnesium. Again, our atomic number up at the top, in this case, is 12, so that tells me I have 12 protons. And then my neutrons are coming from that atomic mass that we're going to round, 24.305 rounded to 24. So I also have 12 neutrons, right? 24 minus 12 would give us 12. Now I got to draw those electrons. I know I've got more than 2, so I'm going to start off with my first ring and put my 2 electrons in that first ring. 1 and 2. Now, if I think about it, I know my next ring fits 8. Well, if that ring fits 8 and I already had 2, that's a total of 10, and I need to draw 12. So I'm going to have a full second shell. So I'm going to go ahead and fill up that whole shell, and then we'll figure out how many more I still need. Again, as we're drawing these electrons, it is just really good to practice. Start by spreading them out, kind of like there are 4 sides. 3, 4, and now that each of those sides kind of has an electron, I can start giving them buddies, making them happy. 5, 6, 7, and 8 electrons. All right, so now my second shell here is full. And if I check, I have 8 in the second, 2 in the first, so I've got 10 total right now. and I need to get to 12. So that means I've got 2 more left to draw in my 3rd energy level. And again, I'm just going to drop them on that line and spread them out because there's less than 4 in that, so they're going to all be spread out. And now if we look, there is my model for magnesium. You can count, double check, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 electrons. And that's our model for magnesium. Again, come back to this notes video, check out the notes, check out the examples to help you understand our practice. And if you have any questions, please feel free to use Remind, email, all of those things, office hours, reach out so that you ask some questions. Otherwise,